See that Donald Trump and his advisors knew that he had in fact lost the election. But despite this, President Trump engaged in a massive effort to spread false and fraudulent information to convince huge portions of the U.S. population that fraud had stolen the election from him. This was not true. Jason Miller was a senior Trump campaign spokesman. In this clip, Miller describes a call between the Trump campaign's internal data expert and President Trump a few days after the 2020 election.
I was in the Oval Office, and at some point in the conversation, Matt Oskowski, who is the lead data person, was brought on. And I remember he delivered to the president pretty blunt terms that he was going to lose.
And that was based, Mr. Miller, on Matt and the data team's assessment of the sort of county by county, state by state results as reported?
Correct.
Alex Cannon was one of President Trump's campaign lawyers. He previously worked for the Trump Organization. One of his responsibilities was to assess allegations of election fraud in November 2020. Here is one sample of his testimony discussing what he told White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows.
I remember a call with Mr. Meadows, where Mr. Meadows was asking me what I was finding and if I was finding anything. And I remember sharing with him that we weren't finding anything that would be sufficient to change the results in any of the key states.
When was that conversation?
Probably in November, mid to late November. I think it was before my child was born.
And what was Mr. Meadows' reaction to that information?
I believe the words he used were, "So there's no there there."
There's no there.
I see a lot of folks on the left, more liberal types that are getting way too excited about these hearings and, using words like bombshells. And, I'm seeing comments in some of these videos saying stuff like, either they were in tears or just having some kind of deep emotional response. And this just goes to show exactly what I've talked about a lot of time here on my channel about just how emotional Americans are. The reality is that much of these hearings consist of information that anyone that's been actually paying attention is well aware of. The gist of what's being covered has already been covered. The main thing that I can see that we're getting from the hearing is basically filling in of the gaps, sort of fleshing out the details of the story. Also, there are things that seemed kind of obvious in terms of clearly such and such is happening, but that's an assumption on your part. In the hearing is taking some of those things that you have assumptions about and moving it from an assumption to fact, right? It looked like they were doing X, Y, and Z. Now we know for a fact that they were doing X, Y, and Z. And how do we know for a fact that they're doing X, Y, and Z? Because we're hearing them say it themselves. We're hearing the words from people who are part of Trump's administration admitting what they did and what they knew. But here is the reality about all these people on CNN and such, overselling this stuff. This is not really going to do much as far as for the people that still have been, still think the election was not legit. After all that has come out, all information we have, if they're still in 2022, still believing that somehow things were stolen, this is not a bombshell, because most people like that did not watch the hearings. And those who might have watched it, maybe watched it on a right-wing channel that talked over it and just picked out pieces that, they could use to sort of attack it and say how it's wrong or it's bad or it doesn't make any sense, right? Or if they actually watched it, and this would be someone who is really, really partisan, who would actually watch it and the information just being filtered through their brain in terms of, for example, the fact that Liz Cheney is the one speaking, like they've already poisoned that well. So it's like her speaking automatically like, oh, Liz Cheney, blah, blah, blah. So you're not even really listening to anything that she's saying, really. It almost would have been better if they just, like, I don't know, but I don't know, just play the video clips without her introducing them, or use somebody else. I mean, I understand the power of having a Republican be this much involved in this, but I think that might be more effective to the people that you don't need to be effective with, which is the people who already know the election was not stolen, right? Like, how much help does Liz Cheney being here, how much does that help in terms of folks on the left, liberal side, progressive side? How much are they going to be like, oh my goodness, they're not going to be affected by this? They already know what happened, right? Right? They don't need her. She would more be someone who potentially would convince a Republican. And I guess maybe that's the idea. It's the Republicans who are not as partisan, perhaps. I don't know. But I don't really think that any amount of evidence is going to get certain people off the cliff, right? You could get Trump's daughter, Trump's wife, you could get all the senior members in the Republican Party, every single one. You could get them on video saying that, well, we knew the election wasn't stolen, but blah, 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 blah. And that would not have a fundamental effect on certain people that are still, because they're just detached from reality, right? Detached from reality, listening to partisans in right-wing media who point out, and many times rightfully so, how detached from reality folks on the left are, right? They're in their little partisan echo chambers. So I have no illusions that showing this stuff like, oh, now they believe that it was. I love it though how these folks are so optimistic, man. They are like, and now this is the one thing that's gonna nail the coffin on Trump. Yeah, keep on dreaming, guys. Keep on dreaming. I'm not saying this isn't gonna change the mind of anybody. Obviously, I don't speak in absolutes, but generally speaking, I don't think this is going to have a fundamental impact because, again, those who get it, and they have gotten it for a long time, and those who have not gotten it, it's too uncomfortable to leave the safety of their security blankets, right? Believing that Trump is some kind of great guy and he's fighting for the people and all this kind of stuff, and the reality of how corrupt and sick and psychotic he is too uncomfortable, especially if you voted for him and supported him. It's going to feel personal, as if it's an insult to you, like if Trump is so corrupt and I supported him, then that's saying that I'm corrupt, but I know I'm not corrupt, so you're going to resist it to the death, right? And I realize that, so I'm not expecting that anything I'm showing here is going to really convince anyone that is that close to the edge.
The Trump campaign's general counsel, Matt Morgan, gave similar testimony. He explained that all of the fraud allegations and the campaign's other election arguments, taken together and viewed in the best possible light for President Trump, could still not change the outcome of the election. President Trump's Attorney General Bill Barr also told Donald Trump his election claims were wrong.
Repeatedly told the president in no uncertain terms that I did not see evidence of fraud. And that would have affected the outcome of the election. And frankly, a year and a half later, I haven't seen anything to change my mind on that.
Attorney General Barr also told President Trump that his allegations about Dominion voting machines were groundless.
I saw absolutely zero basis for the allegations, but they were made in such a sensational way that they obviously were influencing a lot of people, members of the public, that there was this systemic corruption in the system and that their votes didn't count and that these machines controlled by somebody else were actually determining it, which was complete nonsense. And it was being laid out there. And I told them that it was crazy stuff and they were wasting their time on that. And it was doing a grave disservice to the country.
But President Trump persisted, repeating the false Dominion allegations in public at least a dozen more times, even after his attorney general told him they were, quote, complete nonsense. And after Barr's resignation on December 23rd, the acting attorney general who replaced him, Jeff Rosen, and the acting deputy, Richard Donoghue, told President Trump over and over again that the evidence did not support allegations he was making in public. Many of President Trump's White House staff also recognized that the evidence did not support the claims President Trump was making. This is the president's daughter commenting on Bill Barr's statement that the department found no fraud sufficient to overturn the election.
How did that affect your perspective about the election when Attorney General Barr made that statement?
it affected my perspective. I respect Attorney General Barr. So I accepted what he was saying.
Now, if you already believe, as I do, that the election was not stolen, the election was legit, Joe Biden did win the election fair and square, and not because he's a great guy. He only won because of who he was competing against. But anyway, if you already believe that, you won't see a problem with what we just saw from the president's daughter. You would look at that as absolutely damning. And somewhat it is, but I'm betting you did not notice one particular detail that stood out to me right away. Because when we hear things as human beings, the way we are, when we hear things that support what we already believe, we drop our guards very, very low. It's easy to fool someone with something that supports what they already believe, as opposed to trying to change someone's mind, right? If I'm trying to change your mind, you're going to be extremely critical of the information that I use to try to change your mind. But if I'm enforcing what you already believe, you will be very vulnerable. So maybe a minor detail, but it still is a detail nonetheless. They show her responding to a question that we do not hear, right? If you believe, as I do, that the election was legitimate, at least as far as the process, and the counting of the votes went, then you don't need to hear the question asked. You wouldn't even think, as I do, is she really answering the question that I think she's answering? So I just think it was a little sloppy that they didn't let you hear the question so we could know without a doubt what she's answering. I'm pretty sure she's answering a question about, what do you think about Bill Barr saying there's no there, or the election wasn't stolen? I'm pretty sure that's what she's answering. But, with the stakes being as high as they are, and this whole production and all this kind of stuff and a hearing and, everything under oath and all that, could you at least just play a few more seconds so we could hear the question that she's answering? And for those who may think, who cares what differences make, you're putting out information that goes against what a group that is very, very dishonest and has no integrity whatsoever. Not that the Democrats have any integrity. I'm not saying that at all, because they don't. But truth doesn't matter, right, to the people, to the accused, let's say. So they're going to jump into any little gap that they can find. And this is an easy one. Having her say something like that and not have us see the question that was asked opens the door for some spin doctor to come and make a suggestion that, ooh, maybe this, maybe that, right? Then the other issue is, again, considering the stakes, they're interviewing all these people and all these subpoenas and all this kind of stuff. You mean to tell me you couldn't get the president's daughter to actually say some very direct words in terms of what she feels about the election? Like, if I were there interviewing her and she says, oh, well, I respected what he said or something like that, I would say, so could you tell us about your thoughts on the election, whether you think the election was stolen or not? Do you think Joe Biden was elected? Or do you think there's any serious possibilities that the election was actually stolen? So you can get her saying, no, I don't think the election was stolen, right? I don't think these claims about the election being stolen are accurate. Like, that would be, can you imagine the president's daughter saying that, right? But somehow we don't get that. Why? We may never know. Maybe they actually did try to do what I suggested, and she, not being a complete idiot, resisted and danced around, and they just couldn't get her to actually say the words, right? Maybe that's what happened. I don't know. But I just think it sucks the way this played out.
Election cases were so frivolous and unsupported that the president's lead lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, not only lost the lawsuits, his license to practice law was suspended. Here's what the court said of Mr. Giuliani. Giuliani communicated demonstrably false and misleading statements to courts, lawmakers, and the public at large in his capacity as lawyer.
I'm sure that was a liberal judge, probably a rhino. Ooh, copium.
For former President Donald J. Trump and the Trump campaign in connection with Trump's failed effort at re-election in 2020. As you will see in great detail in our hearings, President Trump ignored the rulings of our nation's courts. He ignored his own campaign leadership his White House staff, many Republican state officials. He ignored the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security. President Trump invested millions of dollars of campaign funds purposely spreading false information, running ads he knew were false.
Notice he spends millions of dollars not to contest the election, but to convince you that he won. Right? He was raising all this money, help the legal defense fund and whatever. But you read the fine print, and that really wasn't what it was about, and I reported on that. But then the money gets used either for his own personal benefit or to manipulate the very people that are donating to him. I stole your car, and I sold it back to you. How you like them apples?
And convincing millions of Americans that the election was corrupt and that he was the true president. As you will see, this misinformation campaign provoked the violence on January 6th. In our third hearing, you will see that President Trump corruptly planned to replace the Attorney General of the United States so the U.S. Justice Department would spread his false stolen election claims. In the days before January 6th, President Trump told his top Justice Department officials, quote, "Just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman." Senior Justice Department officials, men he had appointed, told him they could not do that because it was not true. So President Trump decided to replace them. He offered Jeff Clark, an environmental lawyer at the Justice Department, the job of acting Attorney General. President Trump wanted Mr. Clark to take a number of steps, including sending this letter to Georgia and 5 other states, saying the U.S. Department of Justice had, quote, identified significant concerns that may have impacted the outcome of the election. This letter is a lie. The Department of Justice had, in fact, repeatedly told President Trump exactly the opposite, that they had investigated his stolen election allegations and found no credible fraud that could impact the outcome of the election. This letter and others like it would have urged multiple states to withdraw their official and lawful electoral votes for Biden. Acting Deputy Attorney General Richard Donoghue described Jeff Clark's letter this way, quote, "This would be a grave step for the department to take and could have tremendous constitutional, political, and social ramifications for this country." The committee agrees with Mr. Donoghue's assessment.
And I recall toward the end saying what you're proposing is nothing less than the United States Justice Department meddling in the outcome of a presidential election.
In an alternative universe, you are much more disgusted by Liz Cheney, who I am no fan of, right? All these liberals who would, I'm pretty sure, vote for her in the future, which is probably the plan. But anyway, I'll leave that for topic for another video. I'm not one of them. I'm no fan of Liz Cheney. But in an alternative universe, you are more bothered by this woman than some of the most corrupt Republicans in the party, even one who might have been involved in child sex trafficking. Involvement with child sex trafficking is a lower priority than for a woman in the Republican Party to speak out against the party, to not say exactly what the rest of the party is, to think for herself, to have an independent thought, right? To not just go along with the rest as a cult or a clan. That is more a problem than potential involvement with child sex trafficking. Now, let that simmer for a second, let that process for a second, and think about what that says about tribalism in this country and what it does to your brain. All this talk, which is, again, based on my assessment. I've been covering this election nonsense for quite some time. And these are exactly the types of conclusions that I came to without having all this extra evidence. I pointed out many times to my subscribers that most of the time and effort being taken by Donald Trump and his allies was to convince you that the election was stolen, as opposed to spending a lot of time and effort on actually challenging the supposed fraud. That was a major red flag. You're raising all this money. You're about to have this other person be president. You're running out of time. And rather than spending time focusing on challenging the fraud, and keep in mind that most of those court cases were not even about fraud. And that's the whole thing. The actual actions that were being taken was all about marketing. It was all about giving the perception of a certain reality. That should have been a major red flag. If Trump really believed that the election was being stolen, he would not be spending most of his time on marketing, but instead he would be spending his time on challenging and exposing the actual fraud. And exposing the fraud is not pushing out viral videos, right? As we can see, that was my assessment then. Now we know behind the scenes that that's exactly what was happening. Behind the scenes, what was he spending his time doing? Oh, could you send this letter to say that you found stuff, right? Not actually finding stuff and letting the people know. No, asking people to just simply say stuff. Everyone is telling him, no, there's nothing there. This is illegal. We got to stop this. And Trump is just like, no, we got to convince people that the election was stolen, right? But I guarantee you, most of the people who in 2022 still believe that the election wasn't legit, all this stuff that I'm showing you, even actually hearing the people say it themselves, has no impact. Why? In order for it to have impact, you have to actually think and process about this information. You got to process information that is being provided. But how can you do that if your emotions are taking hold of you? As I've said many times, emotions have the ability to block your critical thinking. If you really, really believe something strongly and you have an emotional investment in that thing, it doesn't really matter how smart you are, because with enough emotion, it can block your access to the part of your brain that does the critical thinking, right? So it doesn't matter the facts and evidence and who said whatever, right? Because your brain is not going to be able to process this information, because your emotions will step in and say, well, this and, well, you know, what about ism, right? So I have no illusions that showing this stuff is really going to have much of an impact on people who, again, in 2022 are still talking about Sharpie Gate and Wagon Gate and ballots flipping in the middle of the night and whatever nonsense. Viral Facebook videos. That's what they're talking about. Long debunked videos.
In our hearings, you will hear firsthand how the senior leadership of the Department of Justice threatened to resign, how the White House counsel threatened to resign, and how they confronted Donald Trump and Jeff Clark in the Oval Office. The men involved, including Acting Attorney General Jeff Rosen and Acting Deputy Attorney General Richard Donahue, were appointed by President Trump. These men honored their oaths of office, they did their duty, and you will hear from them in our hearings. Were appointed by President Trump. These men honored their oaths of office, they did their duty, and you will hear from them in our hearings. By contrast, Jeff Clark has invoked his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination and refused to testify. Representative Scott Perry, who is also involved in trying to get Clark appointed as Attorney General, has refused to testify here. As you will see, Representative Perry contacted the White House in the weeks after January 6th to seek a presidential pardon. Multiple other Republican congressmen also sought presidential pardons for their roles in attempting to overturn the 2020 election.
Why would a Republican seek a pardon? What would be the reasoning behind that, unless they believed and knew that they did something worthy of pardoning, aka a crime? Kind of like Nancy Pelosi's insider trading should be considered if it's not.
In our fourth hearing, we will focus on President Trump's efforts to pressure Vice President Mike Pence to refuse to count electoral votes on January 6th. Vice President Pence has spoken publicly about this.
President Trump is wrong. I had no right to overturn the election. The presidency belongs to the American people and the American people alone.
Just look at the crinkle on his face. Imagine that he's in his house, in a smaller area of the house, enclosed by a door, and he's seated on sort of a throne. And imagine that those goddamn beans. And there's a straining and a struggling and a crinkling of the face.
And frankly, there is no idea more un-American than the notion that any one person could choose the American president.
What President Trump demanded that Mike Pence do wasn't just wrong. It was illegal and it was unconstitutional. You will hear this in great detail from the Vice President's former...
Impossible. Republicans are all about the Constitution. They would never do anything to defy the Constitution. You are absolutely mad!
General Counsel. Witnesses in these hearings will explain how the former Vice President and his staff informed President Trump over and over again that what he was pressuring Mike Pence to do was illegal. You'll hear from former Fourth Circuit federal judge Michael Luttig, a highly respected leading conservative judge. John Eastman clerked for Judge Ludig. Judge Ludig provided counsel to the vice president's team in the days before January 6th. The judge will explain how Eastman, quote, was wrong at every turn. And you will see the email exchanges between Eastman and the vice president's counsel as the violent attack on Congress was underway. Mr. Jacob said this to Mr. Eastman: "Thanks to your bullshit, we are under siege." You will also see evidence that John Eastman did not actually believe the legal position he was taking. In fact, a month before the 2020 election, Eastman took exactly the opposite view on the same legal issues.
I want you to go take a look on right-wing media and see what they're talking about. Look at what I said they would talk about days before the hearing, and look at what they're actually talking about, and see if you can see any kind of connection between the two. So I am pretty sure that you're not going to see almost anyone in right-wing media actually discussing what I've shown you in this video. Instead, the conversation is going to be about the hearing itself, that they are having it, why they're having it, how they're conducting it, right? They may do things like attack, Trump's daughter saying stuff and point out what I pointed out, hey, they didn't show the actual question and she didn't really say much, right? But are they going to have a discussion about the points being made in this video? Trump asking for a letter to be sent out saying that there's something suspicious based on nothing. The fact that all these people were telling him the election was not stolen and he kept persisting. You're going to see almost no one in right-wing media talking about these details, right? All these revelations, they're not going to really talk about it. An overwhelming majority of the time is going to be spent on deflection. Let's talk about inflation. Let's talk about the Democrats. Let's talk about the timing of the hearing. And it's something to, they're trying to use this to whatever. And I'm sure they are. The idea that the Democrats are not going to exploit this. I mean, come on. But the point is that they want to talk about everything else but the substance of what's happening. So you may believe that this stuff is nonsense, but know that the folks that you trust and listen to in right-wing media, they are not with you. They don't agree with you. Right? They obviously believe there's some substance to what is being said, which is why they're avoiding it, right? The reason they don't want to talk about it is because there's substance there. Otherwise, they'll be talking about all these things that we're talking about here in detail, breaking them out, breaking them down, and criticizing them, right? Instead of, again, focusing most of your time on the overall effort of the hearing, and it's one-sided and this and that, and Cheney's a rhino and everything else but the substance, right? Ironically, this is the same kind of argument that Tim Pool made when he was talking about the cases that Trump lost. He said, I forgot the way he phrased it, but he said something about not for... I forgot the terminology he was using, but he was basically pointing out that they didn't lose the case based on substance, essentially. Like, they didn't actually have a trial and examine the evidence and do a whole deal. They just dismissed it. They didn't even allow them to hear the evidence. Like, that is the manipulation tactic, right? So ignoring the fact that the cases presented were so absurd and ridiculous that they didn't even meet the very basic standard of something. Like, I can't just go to court and try to sue or whatever just based on a whim. I got to have at least some very, very basic arguments to make before, especially at a Supreme Court level or higher court levels. They're not going to just take on a court case just because, you're bored, right? You got to have at least some very basics. But that's what you're going to see here, right? People are on the right-wing media. They're going to dismiss this, but not on the substance, right? They're going to just completely refuse to dig into the substance and focus on other things that they feel will get them the most clicks and therefore money. And that's what it's all about. So I wonder where the money is coming for Liz Cheney. Anyway, that's for another video. This is the Debate Me channel. Debate me in the comment section below. Click on the like button, subscribe, smash that bell. Be well. Oh, you can click on the like button. Hey, you're not subscribed. I would click on the subscribe button if I were you. I mean, I'm not. I'm not giving you an order. I mean, if you do if you want to. Anyway, I'm just gonna give you some time to click on the like button and subscribe. Take your time, no rush. Actually, I do have stuff to do, so if you want to go ahead and click on the like button and subscribe, I'd appreciate that. I'm not a rush. I'm just in consideration that I have stuff to do. I just don't want to sit here forever waiting for you to just click on 2 buttons. It's free. Come on. Ah, nice. All right. Thank you. Until next time.